Running hospitals, not an easy job. But fortunately here at Stark Lane, we can bring people to you who do very hard, very complex things very well to help you see the secret sauce and critical success factors you may need to be successful in your career. Today we're going to spend about 45 minutes with Susan Bailey. Susan's a friend of mine. She started her career as an ICU nurse and grew up in managerial responsibility, managing ICUs and critical care functions at U.S. News and World Report ranked hospitals like the University of New Mexico's hospital in Albuquerque, University of Nebraska's hospital, Georgetown University Hospital in Washington, D.C. Since then, for the last more than 25 years, she's functioned at the CEO level or higher, so sometimes as a corporate leader, managing multiple hospitals. And she's done so successfully across all time zones in the continental U.S. Susan's message is interesting. It's not about driving revenue. It's not about balance. It's about bringing humanity to leadership, something that's missing in 2026. Let's sit back and see what Susan has to say. Susan, thank you for joining us today. This is super exciting to have you as a guest after knowing you for, I think over 20 years.
Yes, I was looking back on when we first started working together, and I came up with, yeah, probably 20, maybe 25. It's been a long time.
Mm-hmm.
So it's good to be with you this morning. Thank you. I really appreciate having the opportunity just to talk with you, and then the subject matter, which is near and dear to my heart, and I know yours because you've been in the business of helping healthcare executives strengthen their teams.
When we met, actually, you were running multiple hospitals at the time, but you've spent the lion's share of your career as a hospital CEO or a corporate leader overseeing hospital CEOs. And I think we need to let everyone know that, as a hospital CEO, there are a few more things to do every day than sit back behind closed doors making autonomous decisions with your feet up on your desk, right?
Absolutely. And that is such a misnomer, particularly for the staff. Well, generally, I think people don't understand what a CEO does, the complexity of the day. And as we all talk, you go in with your agenda for the day, and the minute you walk through the door, it changes based on the complexities of the environment you're in and what's put before you that day. And I think that's one of the things that CEOs really thrive on. It's the challenge of the day. I mean, you have your overall mission, and the purpose is to take care of patients and make sure that they have the best care possible. And I would say that's a key to your success as a hospital leader of healthcare systems, because if we forget the fundamental reason why we're there and the purpose of when we walk through that door every day, we're not going to be successful. And everybody's going to know that you're not authentic in what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's not an easy job. So I was looking at some stats and some turnover rates because people think, okay, once I make it to my career goal of being a hospital CEO, I'm good. I'm good. I'm just going to sit back and I'm going to run my hospital and my community forever and ever. Amen. But the reality is Definitive Healthcare's recent survey data shows that turnover on average for a CEO tenure is 3.8 years. So far below industry average for a general manager or a chief executive in any other industry. It's tough.
It is very tough. And I will tell you, being a CEO is very lonely. And when you mention those statistics, years ago when I was working for a company, the CEO was probably about 18 months due to the pressures at the time, which in many ways haven't changed at all. But a CEO is faced, and I alluded to this and I'll continue to, the complexities of what you deal with never change. It is the most highly regulated, highly scrutinized job, and I'm sure people that run Fortune 500 companies would argue with that. But I think the key fundamental of being in this position is you're never, or can you lose sight of the fact that we're not dealing with widgets. These are people. These are lives. And the pressures around achieving the goals and responsibilities of that on occasion may get blurred because you're pulled in so many different directions. And it's really a challenge to maintain that focus. And you know, Ryan, what I would do on days that were really difficult, I mean, it's being thrown at you fast and furious, is get out of my office, go walk around, go talk to the staff, go see it, go feel it, touch it. And on particularly difficult days, one of the things that I would do is walk to the ICU, walk through the ICU. And boy, did that center me for the rest of the day to realize what was going on with those patients, with their families. And in many ways, it really energized me to go back and really want to work harder to achieve the goals.
That's so profound because it's not just about making people happy and taking care of patients. You have to make payroll.
Oh,
You know,
oh,
I'm
let
just,
me tell you. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, there's this thing called, revenue. Even Toby Cosgrove, famously said years ago, no margin, no mission. I mean, you have to be able to pay your bills. You have to innovate. You have to invest in research and development and teams and people and new ideas. And to do that while providing great care in an environment with reduced reimbursement year over year, I don't know, you either have to have like a magic wand or you have to be really, really good at balancing, to your point, humanity and the pursuit of
The
a
hard,
margin.
cold dollar fact of it, that you're
Yeah.
really running a business. And in my experience, what I've found really helpful is to educate the staff, to really make them understand that taking care of patients is a business. And like you said, no margin, no mission. And what I did on numerous occasions with small groups of staff was really break down some of the financials for them, so that they would understand that every decision they made about taking care of a patient impacted the revenue, the bottom line. And when you taught people that, and you could see the light bulb go on, like I would say to a nurse, you know what? Every time you call a physician and that physician orders labs based on your assessment, you're impacting what we do financially. And they never really thought about it. And every time you go into that supply closet and take something. So I really found that education and giving people not only the quality outcome data, but what goes into taking care of a patient every day. What's our cost to take care of a patient every day? Not that we ever wanted people at the bedside or anybody in the institution to make a decision based on that, but just to understand the power that they have. And it's really phenomenal to see when staff get that and begin to ask questions about how they too can contribute and help to the financial viability. Given all these things that you just alluded to, reimbursement is really tough, and we all know that, and that's not changed at all.
So you mentioned how lonely it can be as
Mm.
a hospital CEO. And I think to be a successful CEO in any industry, you have to have a balance of hubris and humility. And so you have to have a certain gravitas, to that that inspires confidence in those around you, that lets people know, hey, that person can do their job and I'm willing to go into battle with them every day. I can do hard things as long as I'm with them. But at the same time, you have to be aware of your surroundings. You have to be self-aware of what you can do and what you can't do. And, I think you have to know where those pitfalls are and how not to be, you just have to know how to avoid a bear trap, right? And, I think that delicate balance is probably one of the reasons there's such high turnover, among CEOs.
Oh, you make so many good points with those comments, Ryan. And I think one of the things that really startled me when I became a CEO was developing it. Well, I should step back a minute. I didn't realize in the position that you have as a CEO, when you walk through that door every day, they know you're there. They know what you're wearing. They know what mood you're in today. And that really is powerful in terms of how the organization functions that day. And when I was told that, I was, really? You're kidding me. Oh no. Oh no. They know. They know if you're smiling. They know if you've got a frown on your face. They can tell, ooh, it's not going to be a good day. But in terms of the loneliness, I think that goes because you're never off.
Hmm.
If you
Absolutely.
are so committed, it really is your life. And if anybody tells me different, I would argue with them because it is such an over-consuming job. And I'll tell you what, I loved it. I loved every minute of it. When I walked into that hospital, I'll tell you a story. One day, I parked my car and I was on the phone, like you normally are, all the way in, all the way home.
Hmm.
And about 11 o'clock, the CFO came into my office with security. And I could tell that there was something that they wanted to say to me, but they weren't quite sure how to say it. They said, Ms. Bailey, are you going somewhere? I said, no, why? And they said, because your car's been running since you pulled in. I got out of the car and I forgot to turn it off. I was so focused on what I was doing. And I think that's something that people don't understand thoroughly is that when you are focused on something, listening is one of the most powerful tools you have as a CEO. You
Hmm.
have to listen. It's not about what you're saying, it's what you're hearing and what you do with it. And trust is so fundamental. And yes, I will say you do trust, but ultimately the buck stops with you.
Hmm. So I think we now understand that if you're going to be successful, you can't just be an EBITDA chasing savage. It's just not going to happen.
No, and I certainly have worked with people that are an EBITDA savage,
Hmm.
and they've gone on to be successful in different ways. But I find that is not really authentic, and you
Hmm.
can see through that. It may be good for that CEO for a period of time, but today there's so many measurements, in terms of employee engagement, physician satisfaction, all of those things that you're measured by. And eventually you may be the EBITDA, savage, as you say, making all kinds of money, but you're really failing in many other ways. And there isn't the trust there at all from the team that you're working with. And I will say one of the important ingredients of being a successful CEO, in my experience, is having the ability to form a relationship with the medical staff and that they trust you. They always have needs, they always have wants, they always want the bigger this, the bigger that. But one of the things I learned is you got to tell the truth. I can't do that. We can't do that right now, but maybe we can do it next year. I'm putting that down on my capital budget list. And they appreciate that. They appreciate the honesty and knowing that, okay, she or he said, no, I can't do that. So I have to go on and figure out what I'm going to do or how do I make it happen without that piece of equipment or that drug or that other person in my department, whatever.
That's a perfect segue into your passion, the title of this episode, humanity in leadership, right? Because there's this authenticity. There's no substitute for authenticity to build real relationships. You're not going to be successful if you are building fake pseudo relationships with people that just benefit you. It's a unilateral, one directional thing.
I don't even know where to start with this.
All right, let's go back and talk about medical staff because right now, and I know this because you told me recently in one of our previous telephone conversations that you're doing some work with NCH, right? And
That's correct.
there's a physician over there that was doing some training or a clinic or something, and his messaging was just mind blowing.
hmm
So tell me about that and how that applies because I think that applies to non-clinical leaders as well.
Oh, this is just such a good example. Last week, I was in the simulation center at the downtown hospital, and the simulation that I had the privilege to observe was with a resident that was taking care of a patient who'd had the wrong dose of the patient had the wrong dose of medication, and the resident was having to interact with the patient's wife. Now, the patient's wife is a actor. This is all a simulation.
Mhm.
But after the simulation, with the debrief with the physician who's medical director, really talked about what the resident did well in terms of connecting with the wife. And the fact that the resident had come in and addressed the patient and touched the patient. But the point this medical director was making was sit down next to the wife, make eye contact, have a touch if that's appropriate, touch the hand or touch the arm. And the point he was making is this is not taught in medical school. And that human connection is so important and so very therapeutic in what we're doing in the healing process. But I would also expand on that, Ryan, and say definitely humanity and leadership, which applies to the people that you're working with. And, this is kind of an old thought practice. If you take care of your people, they'll take care of the patients. But how do you take care of your people? And that is really showing them your humanity and understanding theirs. We talk about the patient experience, which is wonderful. We still talk about that. But within that patient experience, we're dealing with their humanity, the family's humanity. And I'm coming to this point now with that concept, just thinking about that really is a sacred space where that physician clinician is having that interaction with a patient about it could be some crisis that that patient and family are experiencing or just something very simple. But that is a profoundly intense human interaction because there's so much trust, so much belief in that person that's communicating to that patient family what's going on.
It's so funny because people don't realize, or people might think that physicians aren't people, but these people coming out of residency, they're kids. You know,
Oh,
we have
absolutely.
we have at least one, maybe two generations of people who've grown up in a highly litigious society, afraid of being sued, for anything and
Yep.
everything. And so, the fact that they don't teach eye contact or possibly touching someone, which could also possibly be perceived as invading someone's space, in the mind of someone who's not trained. It's just something that they wouldn't even think about. And I think that's applicable to leaders as well, right?
Oh, absolutely. And when the first time I was a CEO, I was pretty shut down in terms of really learning to engage and be human. I really made a lot of mistakes, let me tell you, and really evolved through. And I made a lot of mistakes in terms of just what we're talking about. How do you treat people? How do you interact with your team, especially your executive team, who really is your right and left hand? And I was working at one point for a system, and their whole modus was firing, firing, firing. If they weren't doing the job, if they weren't doing the job. And I did that and I failed tremendously. The stress, the chaos that that put on that system was, oh, it was so palpable. They, it, it was fear creating. But to another point, this was years ago when we're talking about physicians coming out and they're so young and they're so socially isolated in many ways. Maybe it's changing a little bit today because of technology. But I was asked, I was a nurse leader at the time, to do a little course with the new interns. And part of that was just to talk to them about rounding. How do you interact with the team? What do you do? How do you talk to them? And they really didn't know, to your point. They had no idea. So to see this physician at NCH in their simulation center really taking that and teaching that is phenomenal and very powerful, very powerful.
It's funny, there are a lot of major investors in the psychiatric hospital industry.
Hmm.
And at the peak of COVID, I was working with, a couple of select organizations there helping them hire leaders for, you know, very, very challenged psychiatric hospitals serving various segments, whether it be adult or adolescent populations or what have you. And the staffing mix was they depended very heavily on mental health techs. And it's funny, the
Hmm.
people that went in for those aggressive financial turnarounds would drive those people out of the hospital so fast because a mental health tech could go across the street to Costco, literally to Costco, and make $1 more an hour. And
Oh,
so
yeah.
and so when you have a workforce that has options, you know, not everybody in that hospital has to work for you. They're not stuck there. They can go
No,
wherever they want and they can live whatever life they choose. And so I think that fine line you walk as a leader, balancing economics and also the needs of those around you, is so tough. And you also can't be a pushover. You can't,
no, no,
you
no.
know.
Again, you make so many good points. And what, you can read, this hasn't changed at all. And you ask people, why do you stay where you are?
Mhm.
And they talk about the team, the support I get. Salary is mentioned. The hospital is run well. You really hear it down at the basic level, the team that I work with. But then if you probe further, now me doing this, not as a CO of that particular hospital, but at another one I was visiting, they will tell you, oh yeah, CEO's good. CEO is a good guy, good gal. Really tells us what's going on, is approachable, see him. And I think today, the CEO has much better opportunity for communication because of technology. Before or years ago, we had to actually do physically present town hall meetings, and I think that's very powerful having staff. But you can have now staff dial in, you and ask questions. It's just such a broader opportunity. But you have to create that environment where that $1 across the street at Costco is negated by the culture in your particular organization. And that culture, as we know, starts at the top. And if it's not there, when I was at the Naples Community Hospital last week, I was talking to one of the leaders, and this is a season here in Florida. And the hospitals used to have to get seasonal nurses to come in because of the surge of patients. And this leader was telling me, not anymore, because we've created a culture where we've been able to hire and retain staff. That says a lot. It says a lot about the culture, the leadership, the caring, the authenticity of the leadership. And from the top, but also at the levels across the system.
I think you've answered my next question already. So those people, and you've hired, I think, maybe a dozen hospital CEOs from me over the year or something close to that. in various markets and I think across
Mhm.
at least two different companies. But, those new people coming in to that role, that this next generation of leaders who is coming up, what advice would you give them in terms of adding humanity into leadership and balancing humility, hubris, economics?
Well, the first thing I would say is you have to get to know your people. You have to get to know your team. You have to get out there, and we've talked about this, even though these CEOs are now coming in and running huge systems, 4,000 employees. How do you possibly tackle that? You've got to make a concerted effort in particularly in that first onboarding, that the people, the staff, the team, the physicians, housekeeping, food services, radiology, they see you, they hear you, you're out, you're walking. You have to develop that trust. I think that's the first thing.
Hmm.
You have to be perceived as somebody who's real. And within that reality is your humanity because you're going out and you're asking people, how are you? What are you thinking? What do you see? It's just not walking through. When you see someone in leadership walk up on a patient care unit and they just, if they're going to visit a patient and they just walk down the hall, they don't even talk to anybody. That's, I can't even comment on that. I don't know if I'm answering your question specifically, but that's the first thing I would say
You
is
are
to
absolutely.
take the time. Don't go in there and try to make change. Maybe who's ever hired you, the board has said, oh, well, we need to increase EBITDA or whatever they're measuring it by 2% or 5%, or we need to change the metrics for patient experience by this percent. You're not going to do any of that unless you start at the beginning to get to know your team and talk to them about what you're about. Tell your story, why you're here, what you're excited about, what you want to do. I guess what I'm saying is, I started out being very closed and like thinking, oh, I just come in and I do my job. That's not going to work anymore. It just isn't. You got to
Yeah.
be out there. You have to be real, despite all of those challenges. And you have to listen, listen, listen.
So you bring up an extraordinary point when you're talking about your board or corporate and the expectations they have of you.
Mm,
And you are the fulcrum, so to speak, in the middle. And then you have all of your staff and your clinicians and your people and your hospital, and your community who's depending on
yes.
you. And a lot of times the expectations of those people in that 360-degree circle are not necessarily perfectly aligned.
No.
So so how do you take care of yourself and prepare yourself to manage all those different expectations and bring them into harmony? Because if you're not, you're going to be on the short side of that 3.8 years, guaranteed.
Well, you have to hold those people close and you have to make sure that you are communicating with them and giving them the opportunity to challenge you. And that challenging process for them probably needs to be done in a meeting, in a staff meeting, and acknowledge the difference and try to listen and say to them, I'm trying to understand your thought process. Please tell me. And doing that over and over. And maybe that sounds a little simplistic, but I don't think
No,
it is.
no,
And really then
nothing is
showing,
simplistic, and there's no such thing as common sense anymore. Those concepts are out the window. These are tools and strategies I think people can implement. So
well, yeah, you know what, Ryan, and you're going to get the outlier you're going to be at a meeting and this person's going to stand up and let you have it. And
Mhm.
you do have to be prepared for that. And then, boy, you either have to be able to you have to be able to control it, that you don't get flustered, that you recognize them but there's also civility in that conversation. And
Hmm.
maybe at that point, you don't have an answer. And you say, you know what? I think we should have further discussion about this. Why don't we meet at, whatever, because I can't answer that question right now. But there are going to be people all the time that are sabotaging you. It just happens. But I think what you learn is if you focus on doing the right thing all of the time, it's going to work. And again, maybe that sounds naive, but that's how I practice.
I love it. I think that's where we need to leave that.
Okay.
How do you feel about diving into some Q&A?
Oh, sure.
I have two questions
Okay.
um, that came in from the last inside Stark Lane email.
Okay.
One is a gentleman running a critical access hospital, and I would say where in Texas, but that would be a dead giveaway. We don't want to do that because I do believe he's presently employed. This came from his work email. But becoming a hospital CEO is my career goal as long as I can remember. I was given my first CEO opportunity, newly acquired hospital in Texas. So, summary, we haven't paid rent in over a year. Every other phone call is a vendor asking for payment. I have no support from our corporate office. Our expectations are outrageous. And then he goes on to kind of paint a pretty sad picture of a dumpster fire. But he also mentions that he thinks he can turn around some relationships with physician groups in the market, and he thinks he can make some headway with some people. So, how does he handle that situation through the lens of what is good for his career long term? I think
Yeah.
this is a guy who wanted to be a hospital CEO his entire career. He gets a shot, and like a lot of situations into like one of our previous conversations, I don't remember the last CEO search I've conducted where it's been a highly functioning hospital, appropriately staffed, dialed in RCM function, full of patients, no issues, no problems. You just come in and lead, right? So, what would you tell someone in that situation?
Wow. This is a tough situation. I'm sure he's not getting any sleep at night at all, and he's very stressed out. I think where he is and how the information I have right now, I think what he needs to do is have a real conversation with whomever he reports to. What are their plans? Are they getting loans? What are they doing? If he gets to the point where he really sees that the powers that be are not going to be able to rescue this sinking ship, he really has an ethical and moral dilemma that he's facing.
Mhm.
And basically, I would say to him, if it gets to that point, he needs to leave. And he needs to do that appropriately with notice. And if he can't carry out the mission that he was hired to do and has no support to do that, he may have the relationships with the physician and the staff. And part of that exit would be the conversation. And this is where he's got to really balance it
Mhm.
and just say, you know what, at this time, this is not working. There's nothing that I can do to improve the situation.
It
That's what
is,
I would do.
and that's a situation that I've seen quite often in the last few years. Is you feel hopeless. I think that the real defining factor there, to your point, is whether or not you feel corporate is really committed to the success of this hospital, the corporate or
Right.
the governing board, the local board. Are
Correct.
they really willing to support you through what it will realistically take to make that financial turn to economic viability, to keep this thing running, to serve that community and serve those patients? Because if you do have that support, it'll be a huge feather in your cap to make that turn.
Oh my gosh, that's a whole different, that's a whole different conversation and direction. very energizing, very, okay, we're going to do this. Then your messaging turns around. You go out and you say, yes, we are going to do this. This is the plan.
Hmm.
But to continue to go every day and not know and to talk to vendors, that's a very difficult place to be without giving them, yeah, look, stay with me here. We're going to pay you in 90 days, or I can give you 20% of, what we owe you now. If you have no message, nothing to say, and no support, but yes, absolutely, if there's a plan. And then the other thing that's powerful for you as a CEO to have that support and have, the whomever that is, a chairman of the board, come in with you and meet with staff, meet with physicians. Yes, we have a plan. Yes, we need your help. Yes, we're going to do it. That's a whole different place to be in my opinion and my experience.
That's a wonderful litmus test. Whoever on the board or at corporate, whatever the organizational structure is, whoever is ultimately accountable for you and your performance, have them come in with you, spend a
Yep.
day in the life. Why don't you get a feel for this? And then let's talk about what we can do to realistically pull this thing out. Because if some organizations have people and boards who are willing to do that, and then others do not. And I think through some of the series of bankruptcies we saw last year,
Hmm.
you saw some of the organizations that just, they weren't authentic. They weren't there to serve. And
Mm,
that outcome that we saw for those organizations, I think is
yeah.
inevitable for anyone in today's healthcare environment who isn't really willing to serve that community and do what it takes.
I think it's really important that the leadership team on a quarterly basis, at least once a year, I would say twice a year minimally, puts on a pair of scrubs and goes spends a day or 4 hours in whatever clinical department that is, shadowing a staff person and not with I mean, when I would do this, they'd give me another badge. So it didn't say CEO, it said,
Hmm.
Susan, I think we would say administration. That is so powerful. So, so powerful. You learn so much. You really get to know the problems of the radiology department or the respiratory therapy or rehab. I just can't say, and I'm sorry I didn't say that because I think as a CEO, that's very important and ongoing as well, because that's where your trust and your authenticity comes from.
Absolutely. I love that. And speaking of scrubs, there are a lot of people that entered healthcare because of a passion for helping people,
Hmm.
a clinical passion. And that's our second question is a lady I actually know really, really well. She's worked in acute care. She's worked in rehab. She's a chief nursing officer for a company that operates freestanding emergency departments. They now have 5 locations,
Hmm.
but she wants to make the move into operations. But she fears that she has been pigeonholed as a clinician and a clinical leader. So what could someone like that do to position themselves appropriately to make that jump to the CEO seat?
Well, having done that myself, I think what she has to do is make sure she can speak the language of whomever she's reporting to. And what I mean by that is really understanding the financials. She's really got to get into that because that really begins to level the playing field when people see that you're able to understand what's in there, what's my cost per patient day, what goes into that, what's my labor cost, what can I do, all of that. I think that's really the leveling factor. And this sounds really terrible, and I'm going to say it anyway. You've got to kind of take on a different skill set in terms of getting out of your scrubs
Hmm.
and putting on the outfit, whatever it is of leadership in that organization. But You can still wear your scrubs, but if in that transition, it's about behaving as the team does and adapting what it is that they're focusing on, not adapting, but learning, getting outside of your clinical and broadening your horizons and learning what other departments are doing. It's doable. It's very doable.
I think it's a superpower. So if you come up and you're a clinician and you want to make that jump, if you do exactly what you said and you're willing to make that shift and dive into that new world, you have a unique perspective that not a lot
Oh,
of others have. Your typical MBA, that doesn't have the clinical background, doesn't have your perspective, doesn't have your insights. And so I think the biggest opportunity I've seen the last few years, especially during COVID, during, excuse me, executive leadership staffing shortages, we've seen CNOs taking on dual roles in operations, especially
yeah,
in
it's
smaller
awesome.
hospitals.
It's
And
awesome.
it's that's a lot of work. That is hard, but
Oh, it's hard work, but to your point, you make such a good point because I mean this is why I think CNOs and physicians have gone on to be such successful executive leaders because they really understand the pulse of what makes a hospital work. And to your point, many years ago when I was working at a university healthcare system, I made an appointment with the CEO and I went down and I met with him. And my question to him is, well, I want to be a CEO. How do I do that? Do you know what he said to me? You can't.
that
Nurses don't make CEOs. You can't. I never forget that man said that to me. Never.
is fuel for the fire.
Absolutely. Well, I'm going to show him. Actually, sent him a card the first time I was. But I think
Nice.
that coming out of the clinical is adds so much to the success of being a CEO. I mean, you can walk around the hospital, you see things that, no offense to our colleagues that are not, and there are many CEOs out
Hmm.
there that are not clinical by nature, but you just see the hospital very differently than a non-clinical leader does. Because as you walk around, if you're on a patient care unit, you're walking down that you see oh, that patient's going to fall out of bed. Oh, the care looks good. The call lights aren't going off. That patient looks great. I mean, there's stuff that you pick up that just is very innate with you.
Building on what you just shared, my advice to anyone in that situation who says, well, I've got this, I just need the opportunity, I would just revert back to and reference the Malcolm Gladwell book, Outliers, right? And the
Hmm.
first, I remember I was about halfway through the second chapter and I was so frustrated because I thought, okay, this guy, Malcolm, is saying that these people got lucky because of their extenuating circumstances. No, that's not the case at all. You load yourself up with experience, with education. You take every opportunity to sharpen every tool you have.
Yes.
And then when you see that sliver in the door, opportunity is not going to beat down your door at a moment when it's convenient. You're going to see that opportunity, but you have to be prepared for it with education, with experience. And then when it presents, you have to be able to take it. And not everyone is going to be prepared for that.
No, and you also point out that it takes a certain amount of risk to jump out there too.
Hmm.
And sometimes it's painful, and sometimes it's not going to be, you think it's the time and it's not. But you've got to keep pushing if that's truly what you want to do. And I will tell you, when I decided I wanted to be a CEO and I had that first meeting where I told I couldn't be, it really did put fire in my belly to figure out just really what you're saying. And I think what you said is so important. You have to continually educate yourself. And one of the things that I always did with my team, we almost had a book club. I would give them things to read, not, like an
Hmm.
encyclopedia. And once every couple of weeks, we would talk about it just to keep everybody fresh and looking at new ideas and learning because in healthcare, things are changing all the time. in some ways they don't change, but in other ways they change every day, and you better be prepared to deal with that. So you make really good points in terms of the outlier. And you know what, Ryan? When you go in and apply for a job and you're interviewed, I mean, I've interviewed young people and I've said,
Hmm.
you're not ready yet. This is what you need to do. And they'll go, oh, okay, but be honest, because if they're not ready, maybe the next time you're looking, they will be.
Hmm. Absolutely. And I know that I'm not the only person here that appreciates your insight and your experience.
Oh,
And that I think this is a really good segue into for those who would like to hear more from Susan. So you've got an up and coming podcast that's being released next month. What is the name of your podcast?
well, the name of my podcast is another story. And how I came upon that is just talking to people. And my own experience as a brain aneurysm survivor probably drove that. Well, I know it did. But each of us has a story. And
Hmm.
I think storytelling is so powerful. And particularly in the world we live in today, that's dealing with humanity. And the stories of strength, courage, resilience, I think are just riveting. So that's what my podcast is going to be about.
Awesome. And I'll make sure that everybody can find a link to your podcast in this description below.
Thank you.
And on that note, come back and see us again very soon at Stark Lane because we've got new subject matter coming out, hopefully every week.
Well, Ryan, I definitely will. And thank you. It's great to talk with you again all these years that we've known one another. Continued success to you. And I think of you as just a real talent, a true friend. And wow, the work that you've done out there to help leadership in healthcare is very, very notable. So I want to thank you.
This has been the Stark Lane podcast. You can find us on YouTube, Spotify, and wherever you find the programs to elevate your career and your passions. Now, get back to work.